My name is Allene Gremaud, and I am the Nutrition and Health Specialist in St. Charles County. We have a course that has many different components to it. There are 6 different sessions that are each about 1.5 to 2 hours just regarding home food preservation. So this is going to be a very brief snippet. What do you need to know? So it's important to note that if you are currently preserving your foods at home and you learned how to can specifically from like your mother or your grandma, a lot has changed since the 90s. So there's been a lot of research done, and we know that there are a lot of practices that people were doing before that we know now are not safe. So our main safety concern with canning specifically is botulism. So botulism is a microorganism that can be inside of your food products. It can be in the soil, and so it can get into your food when you pick it. And then if your products are not properly preserved, not properly canned at the appropriate time, at the appropriate pressure, that kind of thing, then you may kill the actual microorganism, but the spores may still be there. And then those spores release a toxin, and that toxin is bad for us. And so there have been cases of people dying from this. It's also important to note that you cannot see if your food has botulism toxin in it after it's preserved. You can't taste it, you can't smell it. So that's what makes it especially dangerous for us. So we want to make sure that we're using safe practices so that if we are preserving our own foods at home, that we're keeping ourselves and our loved ones safe. So that's why it's important to use tested recipes when canning. And then you always want to make sure that you're using reputable sources. So your local extension office, and then there's a couple other resources I'll give you as well. There's the home food preservation resources. There's a website for that as well. There are other methods other than canning for preserving your produce, just a couple of them: dehydrating, freezing, and fermenting. And our online class does cover all of these. Just a very quick snippet of canning. pH matters. There are a lot of different factors that go into how to safely can your produce, but pH is one of the really important components, and it determines our method of canning. So if we have a low acid versus a high acid food, that determines whether we're going to pressure can or if we're going to use a water bath canner or a steam canner. So steam canners are new. They can be used interchangeably with a water bath canner. So our high acid foods, which would be our foods that are low on the pH meter here on the right side of the screen, those are typically our fruits. And then our low acid foods would be things like our vegetables and our meats. And so for our low acid foods, we need to pressure can those to make sure that they are safe for us to consume. And then our high acid foods, we can use that water bath or steam. What gets really tricky here, and another reason it's really important to use tested recipes, is when we're making food products that have a mixture of these foods. Like if you're making salsa, tomatoes, if you can see here, they're right on the border of that low acid versus high acid food. And then a lot of times we add in vegetables to that salsa recipe. So most of your salsa recipes or your canning tomato recipes will have you add an acid like vinegar, lime juice, lemon juice, things like that, to make sure that they're staying acidic enough for you to be able to use a water bath canner. So if your recipe calls for a 1/2 cup of onion and you think that it's safe to add an additional 1/4 cup, that's not accurate, because you may tip that balance to make it a low acid food, and then your product would not be safe to process in a water bath canner. You would have to use a pressure canner. So it's really important that we use and follow those tested recipes. And then freezing is a quicker way to preserve our foods depending on how you're doing it. And I just want to note that this is better for low water foods. So for example, if you had a ton of extra tomatoes, freezing would be a really hard way to preserve those tomatoes, because since there's so much water inside of those tomatoes, when you freeze them, the cells in the tomatoes are going to burst when that water expands. And then when you go to thaw them, you're going to have a really mushy product. You can eat it, but the texture just won't be ideal. So we want to make sure that we're using the proper means of preserving to have the best product when we go to eat it as well. So things that you can freeze, a lot of people freeze corn, you can freeze green beans, things like that. Meats are excellent to freeze, or some things that are too thick in consistency for us to can, like our pestos or like a pumpkin puree, you would have to freeze that as well. And a lot of times when we're freezing our vegetables and stuff specifically, it's better for us to blanch them actually for a couple minutes before we freeze them so that whenever we do thaw them, we're eating them later, they have a better quality. Here's a bunch of resources. We do have an online food preservation class. Unfortunately, we are not offering in-person home food preservation classes at this time due to the pandemic, but our online food preservation class has a lot of awesome information. It's only $30 and you get a lot of handouts with recipes for how to can and recipes for how to freeze. It tells you everything from time to blanch all your different vegetables to which vegetables are the best to dehydrate. Preserve It Fresh is an online newsletter that is on our extension website. If you just Google Preserve It Fresh MU extension, there's a newsletter that goes out every other month, I believe. It's got recipes and awesome information. They had information on freezing mushrooms in the last one, which was kind of cool. And then on the right side of the screen here, you can see there's a monthly Q&A session with a St. Louis County specialist, Leslie Birch. She's the nutrition and health specialist there. She's got one coming up on August 20th, but also one on September 17th and October 15th. And this is a short Q&A session. It's only an hour long, so it's really kind of reserved for those people that have taken that online food preservation class or have been doing a lot of canning. You can also get your pressure canner tested at your local extension office. We recommend that you test your pressure canner gauge lids at least seasonally, or if you drop them, or if it's been cracked or submerged in water, things like that, because that can alter your pressure canner gauge. And we want to make sure that you are preserving those foods at an appropriate pressure and that that's accurate and safe. And then also I've got some information here. University of Georgia handles the National Center for Home Food Preservation. There's a lot of excellent information there as well. You can contact your local nutrition and health specialist in their office. I know this map is kind of small here, but it's got who serves your county, and you can contact them with questions about duration and pressures for pressure canning your foods, things like that. Most of Missouri is under 1,000 feet, which means that we can pressure can at 11 pounds, which is good. And then if you're out of Missouri and you're at a higher elevation than 2,000 feet, Colorado State can tell you what you need to pressure can it as well. Here's my information as well. We also have a statewide nutrition and health Facebook page, MU Extension Nutrition and Health. And then below is a little bit of information about my specific office.